Okay, that's good.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll be professional now, kind of.
In the darkness we will rise, stand for light to save deliverance. Oh, Emperor, hear our call. Why must we fall?
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Mirror Manga's Grimdark YouTube channel. I'm so excited today. I am with Gav Thorpe. Hi, Gav.
Hello.
Hi. And we are talking about your amazing book, Deliverance Lost.
A nice version there as well from the
Oh,
Legends collection.
It's such, I mean, I actually now fancy Corax because of the artwork. So, I mean, it's gorgeous, really beautiful edition. It's got
Yes.
timelines in there. Yeah. Neil Roberts, right? The artist.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Stunning stuff. I This is one of my favorite books in the Heresy, and I definitely think this could be my Legion.
All right. Okay.
So
Nice.
yeah, so that is an accomplishment. Yes, Ian laughs at me because they are the most emo of all legions.
Supposedly, yes, that's right.
Supposedly. But you and I had some really nice email exchanges, and I was writing to you, and I think I wrote something like, "Oh my God, I'm on this roller coaster with Corax. Like, what is happening?" And you were like, "Yes, it's incredibly intense." And it was really hard for me to write. So you obviously got that vibe too.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was definitely one of those um, one of those stories where I really wanted to get into how he ended up. Like I say, like the meme is like, yeah, the Ravenguard are the emos and Corax is king of the emos, but sort of
Yeah.
like at least characters always have to be like a journey. So he doesn't start off that way, and
No.
you know, and he has some hits and misses along the way, really. But it's a general downward trend.
Yeah.
Um,
With
so
as with many of our heresy books. Hang on, I just dropped my notes. Hang on a sec. My enthusiasm to show you hot pictures of a Primarch, I threw it across the room. But I guess we'll come on to that later. But I was really interested because when I talk to authors, I ask about lots of stuff, but actually thinking about the emotional effect of being on that downward journey, I found really interesting to think about. But this was written way back. This came out in 2012, I think. I've
sounds about
definitely
right.
look at the back of the book. There's loads of space for your notes. So
Nice.
this was published in 2012 on the back of The Age of Darkness, which is basically all short stories about how terrible everything's becoming, and then The Outcast Dead. So you're seeing like even Terra is, not having the best
Mm,
time of it. And we know that the timeline is turning to the point where there's a realization people know the heresy's happening now. The word is out about Istvan. So in 2000, I guess you must have written this around 2010, 2011. Could you tell us
yeah.
how you came into the fold? Because this is your first book in the heresy. So yeah.
Yeah, so it was my entry into the heresy was actually an audio called Raven's Flight, which was like one of the first Horus Heresy audios and one of my first audios as well, which was very exciting. Um, so I wasn't part of the original first tranche of writers, the original kind of team, but sort of fairly early on, and um, because the ball was already sort of rolling, as it were. I was looking for somewhere I could kind of fit in without having, there was a lot of momentum already building with a lot of the big stories. So it's like, okay,
Mm.
what hasn't been covered yet? And and I kind of I was looking through sort of like the extant background of the different legions and things, and um, there was one particular bit that just kind of came up, which was just like, how did the Ravenguard get off Istvan? Yeah, it was just like it's one of those questions never been answered. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, they somehow they escape, well, some of them escape the
Mm.
massacre, and so there was a way of looking at that question, but also really showing the extent of how mauled those legions were, even the ones that got away and things like that. So that was the trigger really for Raven's flight, of like just coming up with this conceit, I suppose, this idea of, like, okay, there's a puzzle to solve, so come up with a story that sort of explains that away. And in the process of doing that, obviously, I wanted to focus on Corax, but also on the other part of the Legion and the the whole kind of, there's a sub story with the Therian cohort and a character called Marcus Valerius and things.
Yeah.
So that was a nice way to just sort of like have a couple of different viewpoints of the Ravenguard, but also at the same time it was doing some cool stuff with Primarchs as well, and just getting,
Yes.
like ripping bits off tanks and throwing them around and
Yeah.
having some good ones. But he does have there's definitely a bit which is again, he goes to have a look at the site of the massacre itself and just sees the devastation and all the dead space being Ravenguard, and he's totally isolated and alone at that moment, and it's kind of like very. I remember very distinctly because I have various writing playlists, music, and they're usually soundtracks and things like that. And by coincidence, so one of the ones I had on sort of like in the rotation at that time was the soundtrack for the Watchmen movie.
Oh my goodness!
And as I was writing that scene, the track that came up is the one. It's just entitled. It's something like "Just Look Around" or something like that, and it's quite a bleak track, and like it is that moment, and it was like really, it obviously just struck a note while I was writing it as well. So it's just one of those synergies I kind of remember of like because usually it kind of fades in, just into a sort of background noise to help me concentrate. But at that time, it was like that is the soundtrack to that scene.
Gosh, yes.
So
The Watchmen's was a pretty bleak movie as well. I'm imagining I probably know where that song came in, but no, I did get a kind of sense that it did feel a little bit like a music video in some elements. There was so much in the best possible way, and I thought. One of my favorite things is reading about the Primarchs, and you had some fantastic set pieces where we see other big characters coming in and out, really lighting up the pages, and things like the escape, and then the labyrinth, and then the encounters with the Emperor. So it really I couldn't put it down. It was so frustrating because I was like, oh. And there was another thing I wanted to address. I'm trying to do this in an organized way. So I've got all these exciting questions to ask, but what was it like? So I'm trying to do it chronologically. What was it like entering in and joining in with, because you had Dan, you had Graham, Jim, all of those lot. How did they welcome you in? How did they usher you? Were you allowed in a secret room where all the plans were laid? How did it go?
Well, that was basically it. Yeah, it was like, there were fairly regular Horus Heresy meetings, and certainly at that stage, everyone there was enough people to fit into it. It used to be the boardroom of GW, and so that was it really. I was invited by Black Library to sort of like join the team, as it were, and came in, and so
exciting.
Well, exactly, and it was definitely just time to shut up and listen, because like I said, there was a lot of stuff already happening, so trying to absorb that and trying to really tease out what was specific about the Horus Heresy compared to any other Black Library writing, and and like I say, trying to, without having been there in those original conversations, of like, okay, right, having obviously I'd read the books, so it was, had that, but trying to work out what was behind the scenes in terms of the approach to the setting, the approach to the characters and things like that. So but everyone was, so I did Raven's Flight and a couple other short stories, but then when we were into Deliverance Lost, and that was very much, it was kind of fairly quick that it was agreed that would be the first novel to follow up with the Ravenguard. Kind of made sense. And so the way the meetings tend to work is people be talking about what they were planning or what they're already writing on and stuff, and you go around the room, so there might be some overall topics everyone's talking about. So there was always lots of, everyone was the whole point was everyone was very free with their ideas, and sort of like, well, you're right about this, and I had this cool idea. So for example, a lot of the Alpha Legion angle and their involvement in things came from Dan, because he just finished writing Legion and things like
Legion.
that. So, and had been very, and I'd read that, and again, it was a very different kind of novel. So,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like, well, I was thinking, maybe it was like this, and so yeah, and you say this exchange of ideas, and you build up. You're
Yeah.
not just working on your own; you're building up this kind of 3D view of the heresy a bit more. So even though the Ravenguard kind of, for a large part, follow their own path through the heresy, that's one of the other things, is they don't really touch on many of the other legions very often, because there's very few of them left.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you have to still make them part of that narrative and feel relevant, as opposed to, like, well, and here's a story that also happened to be at the same time but isn't really connected. So just
Yeah.
trying to get some of those links in with, some of the Imperial Fists coming
I mean-
over and some custodians, and trying to mix it up a bit, and just like
Yeah.
make it feel like it's more than just one Primarch's kind of.
I mean, I thought it was so great. It was really thrilling how many different, things you slipped in. Like we got a taste of everything. And I love, for me, it seems such a unique concept that the Black Library authors create this thing that already exists, but work together to amalgamate it. And yeah, I hear that you got to choose this, the Ravenguard, but you got some big points. There were some big plot points in this book. It feels like a movie
Yes.
to me that you got to hit. So that was particularly thrilling to me as well. So yeah, I've written. So this is my sophisticated question. You got to hit some massive plot points. Was this something that everyone was like, if you're taking this Legion, we need you to know that in this book, you're going to have to cover the Emperor revealing big secrets and that bloody code getting out there. Like, they're pivotal points that and obviously I don't know, I had no idea. I was still hopeful that there was going to be some way, oh, please just let the Ravenguard have it. They've been through so much. No, everyone's going to get it. And bloody Fabius Bile, who
Yes.
I already hate. I know nothing about him. So sorry, I'm just talking at you. But
No, it's cool.
Were they like, here is your piece of red string and you must now join these massive plot points? Or did you think, you know what, I'm gonna interpret how this all happens? And yeah, how did that go?
Yeah, so certainly, like I say, that sort of Age of Darkness and that middle part of the heresy was very much sort of lots of ideas exploding outwards. So we'd had, the original trilogy had been obviously very tightly planned, and then a few of the other earlier books sort of moved everything on. But at this stage, it was like, okay, everything's got into motion, and we're going to start just exploring this galaxy at war and how that's unfolding and stuff. So it was more things like my kind of personal like hit list, I suppose, of like, oh well, it'd be great if it does this, and but it all stemmed from the character of Corax, and Corax, and it's that kind of one of those. It's not literally a line in the book, but one of those kind of influences is that idea of like, oh Father, why have you forsaken me? That's the sense of abandonment that he has, and the first thing he's going to do is check with his dad, because the whole thing is his moral code comes from the idea that the Emperor says it's okay.
Yeah.
That's and so I've always basically, because there's always the comparison. There's a lot of comparisons between Corax and Conrad Kurz, and why one went this way and one went the other way. And I said, well, the only real difference, because they did a lot of the similar things, but the only real difference is Corax felt bad about it afterwards. It's like, and that was and that, again, that's the slightly mopey emo meme. But actually, that idea that he does have a conscience, he will do the terrible, pragmatic, horrible things required of a leader in terrible. It's like he nukes the planet that basically is enslaving these people and stuff. But he doesn't glory in it. That's the point. And that's and then when he meets the Emperor, essentially the conversation, the subtext is like he's basically like, oh, okay, it's cool because he doesn't, unless he couch it as God, but it's like, but Dad, but this figure who created me says it's okay, and I'm and therefore it's all right. And it's that doubt, because again, it's I like, again, teasing at those themes of 40k, and doubt begets heresy. It's one of
Mm.
those phrases, and that's what undoes. That's the only thing that undoes Corax is himself and his doubts that are opened up by having to fight his own brothers. No, he's never really got on that well with anyway. But actually, the fact that they turn to see his own legion debased and the vulnerabilities and stuff opens him up to that. And as soon as he's open, as soon as that, blessed is the mind too small for doubt. But he's always been a bit of a philosopher as well, so he can't square these two things. So the first thing he's going to do is run back to Terra and check that everything's okay. And his dad won't talk to him, and he has to insist on he
Please
needs that. And essentially, and has that moment. He has that, and again, because we don't really know what's going on.
No.
Well, at least he doesn't behind the scenes. We know the Emperor's very busy and disappeared for ages, and the fact that he even just spares an iota of moment of his consciousness to fix Corax on a path, at least because just like push, just gets him to step back from the edge slightly. So, all right, go and rebuild your legion. Here's an idea. Here's how you can go and do it. To keep, maybe even just to keep him busy and out of the way or whatever, because he could quite easily.
No, don't say that.
Well, it's not that. Well, that's the thing, we don't know. We never know what it's the Emperor, and the Emperor's been presented in many different ways and encountered in many different ways.
Well,
but again, it was part of that idea of like the Corax sees the Emperor the way Corax wants to see the Emperor. That's how he's visited, and other people. That's part of that. One of those things that we always talked about in those meetings when we talk about, it's like the Emperor is this numinous being who isn't one thing to everybody. And so when Corax visits him, and funnily enough, he's the one person who sees him as a person. And again, it's all none of it's answers, but it's all like, well, is his own personal abilities and his glamour, is that connected to how he can see what he thinks? Because is it really the real Emperor, or does he just believe he can see the real Emperor? All that kind of stuff.
Well, I mean, he gets to see the deity Emperor, the God Emperor, overlapping the human Emperor. But more than that, I mean, I absolutely love you and I hate you, Gav, because
that's the response I always want.
When you say, "Oh my God," just choking on my own enthusiasm, the way that this legion is debased is essentially the faces of their fellow brothers in the legion are stolen and taken by the Alpha Legion. This is the first time I discovered that Space Marines could imbibe properties of people by eating parts of them or wearing their faces. That was lovely, and that felt, because we were reading the Betrayer's Path, that felt very, very painful. And the whole way through, I was like, Gav, why have you put these thorns in the side? And then there was something you did I'd love to talk about later, which is you gave, so the Alfarius is one of the baddies who steals a face. And as he's training and becoming a brother with the rest of the Ravenguard, you gave me hope. Oh my goodness, he's seeing, he's enjoying, he's having human emotions and finding regard for these brothers. He's going to save them all at the end. And what happens is, at the end, there's an opportunity to stab people in the back, chainsaw faces off, and that's exactly what he does. So
absolutely,
I thought that was so clever, so cunning. I fell for it, head, he fell for it. But I love you because I have been craving father and son time, and Corax, the baby, he's the littlest, and even though he's this. I love the way you wrote him. He's always he's always too big for his surroundings. He's always mindful. I can't sit on a chair. I'll squash it, And but his heart is big, and you gave him a scene with the Emperor where the Emperor, like, they touch. The Emperor reached out a hand, and Corax felt hot fingers upon his brow. And this is so beautiful. Energy flowed through the Primarch, knitting his shattered bones, stemming his pouring blood, healing wounded muscles and organs. The Primarch gasped, filled with love and admiration. Stand. Corax did as the Emperor commanded, his strength restored. I'm sorry, Father, said Corax, dropping to his knees once more. I know that your labours are important, but I have to speak with you. Of course you do, said the Emperor. The majesty and power had gone from his voice, leaving only a tone of respect and admiration. Oh, sorry, emotion. You have endured so much to come here. I feel that's all I've wanted for like 18 books. And I just thought that was such a moment for me in the book. The way that you wrote the Emperor was exactly how I wanted him to be received.
Yeah, I think it's, and which is because that's exactly what Corax needed as well. If,
Mm.
you know, again, it's like he refuses to heal. You know, he's a Primarch. It's like he can bounce back from a lot, but it's like he will basically prefer to let himself die than actually then not have the acceptance of the Emperor. And in that moment, he receives it. You know, he receives that kind
Yeah.
of benediction of like, no, it's all right. You know, and actually, the thing is, of course, the Emperor is all things. So there's also like there's the layer underneath, if you want to, of the pragmatic war leader who's like, well, one of my weapons is broken. I'm just going to fix it.
Yes. Yeah.
And you know, and I could do that with a touch. You know, it's like he's being very silly. He's not fixing himself. Doink.
Yeah.
I'll reset, turn it off and on again.
Yeah.
And then give it, you know, what it needs to go and rebuild this legion to fight for me.
Yeah.
But and it's interesting that he does that for Corax and never does anything like that for Dawn. That was
Yeah.
one of the other things. The whole point was that Dawn was like, it's the Praetorian, it's the Empress Crusader, all these other things. Is his first and foremost probably his most loyal son above all the others and stuff. And in a way, the Emperor's refusal to speak to him, to be distracted by him, strengthens Dawn in a similar way that actually, you know, so, and Dawn doesn't get jealous of Corax or anything like that. It's like he's very protective of the Emperor's time, and he's the one who tries to stop Corax and, you know, all the rest of it. But you know,
Well, I as an
so his interactions with them are very different.
yeah, but I thought as an eldest child, I was like typical. Like you know, the Emperor's like, this one's fine, minimal trouble, no, you know, no dipping into the wall, no demons up him. You're fine. Now, where's the baby one? Okay. And you know that need,
Yeah.
yeah,
Daddy gets it better.
yes. And I really, you know, I really heard, you know, Father, why have you forsaken me? And there were moments where, you know, Lorgar completely out in the cold, you know, Corax in the labyrinth, you know, the Emperor will still even come and help him unlock the secret. You know, Corax makes it all the way there, typical youngest son. Oh, Dad, you know, and there's a tiny bit more help. So that for me really humanized the Emperor, definitely bringing my eldest child bias in. But, you know, some fantastic, again, I was absolutely greedy for this book. We learned some real secrets. So, for example, the underground lake, where all of the Primarchs had a room overlooking the same lake. So if Emperor's plans had not been thwarted, they would have grown up together. That was,
That was their dorms, basically. Yeah. You know,
I mean,
but and yes, exactly. And he built it and he kept it for some reason, despite
yes,
everything. You know, is the other thing. You know, oh, I kept your room for you again.
yes. I mean, that was I mean, I read and reread.
Or forgot it existed. You know, there's always two edges with the Emperor. So you know, but no, I mean he gets taken there and all the rest. You know, so it's like it's you know, it's somewhere. You know, again, it was trying to have those layers for the Primarchs of. And for Corax, it's having that quiet, you know, it's like the idea that he might have had this quiet space that, you know, it's the dream. Because again, it's about making small the very big ideas of the heresy about, you know, were the legions expendable, were the Primarchs ever meant, you know, what they were ever meant to do, and not necessarily making definitive statements that people can just say, it was, you know, the Emperor will never say, I did this, this, and this, but actually there were obviously plans there. There were obviously, and the Primarchs themselves, again, particularly towards the end of the Great Crusade, start to think, oh, what's next? And Corax is definitely one of those because he's doing these horrendous things and subjugating planets, and very, very definitely is not on the side of the oppressive bad guys. Honest, you know, like because they're the bad guys and we fought against them.
Yeah.
And I'm not doing any of that stuff, right, Dad? No, it's fine. You're liberating the galaxy.
Yeah.
And so, and looking forward to just like going, you know, like, oh great, I'll get to write down everything I've learned and teach everybody. I won't have
Yeah.
to fight anymore, and I'll tell everybody how bad it is to do this stuff, but how you do it really well. And just little things as well, because just being able to and reflect his reflections on the other Primarchs. One of my favourite bits that I came up with it. I suppose it's a bit like my own trumpet, but I really like the idea that when he that in like that kind of war gamesy type stuff, or whatever, he beat Gilliman the first time because he was so unorthodox. Gilliman couldn't handle him. But as soon as Gilliman learned, he never beat him again.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how. But he never could find another trick to quite beat Gilliman. He was never quite the strategist, but he had one trick first time, and that's all he needs.
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas Gilliman needs at least one loss to learn.
Yeah.
That kind of. He already knew how to beat Gilliman, but Gilliman had to lose to learn how to beat Corax, and things like that. So again, it's just little layers of personality between them.
I love that. I felt like you were kind of reverse engineering me in that I would sense a little ripple, like, so for example, Corax won once and then, was learned. But the bigger picture on that is, well, this is how Ravenguard operate. We're going to strike hard, get it all done, and then disappear. So that you gave me that little ripple, and that helped me with the realization that, this is part of it. And all the little drops of humanity were, Corax is so sympathetic to the humans around him and his, he wants to save everyone. No, even if they've been mutated, we're saving them. We're going to do everything we can. And dropping in these, showing like a hopeful, kind, sympathetic interaction side made it so much more painful when everything was lost. I mean, clues in the title, Deliverance Lost, but I was aware at the end of the book, wow, my every emotional string has been played like a harp. And for me, that's the magic of, a really great author, that you've got to hit these massive story beats, but within that journey and the reflections of seeing the more human kind of counterparts and their struggles. I just thought, how do you even do that? I really loved it. So yeah.
It came again. It sort of came down to that idea of getting a very character. I always go for very character-driven rather than plot-driven stories.
Yeah.
That's just what I like. The character and their dynamic is what pushes it through. And so, again, my first book, so it's my first chance to have a go at all of these themes, and one of them being again the ongoing debate about how much of the Primarchs was nature and how much was nurture, which of course again is a human debate, because that's the other thing is, it's sci-fi, it's fiction, it's all just about talking about people, really. They're just our excuses to talk about people. So the again getting into those just few paragraphs of the fact that and thinking it through of like, well, he was raised in a prison by most part political dissidents who were oppressed and enslaved, and he fought. It's like what personality does that create? Assuming that again, one of the ideas, again not proven but explored, is the idea that actually the Primarchs were a little bit of a tabula rasa, that the planets they landed on, they hadn't been imprinted with whatever it was the Emperor wanted to create yet before they were spirited away. So that's why they're so good at adapting to the worlds they live on, and they take to their cultures and become one with them, because that's what the Emperor had created them in such a way that when he was going to create them into the, how much of his image were they created, and how much of the places they landed on, and isn't it a coincidence that Leman Russ landed on Fenris, and that, well, or the other way around, it's like whoever landed on Fenris would have become Leman Russ. And so Corax and being part of that freedom, being he's a freedom fighter, not a terrorist. That's definitely his thinking, and all the rest of it. And being raised by normal people with a streak of egalitarianism, and embracing those ideals that they did in a way that Conrad Kurz did not. He's thrown into den of thieves and survival of the fittest, or and he rose to the best position he could within that, which is he ends up leading the rebellion and things. He couldn't become, well, he does later kind of become king of the planet, as it were, but within reason. So those, and those are themes I revisit with all the other characters, Primarch's characters later on, but with him, that's why he has those moments. And it's and I love that, because again, it's like the first moment when he meets the girl in the mine when he first comes out and presents her with the head of the guard, and it's just like, because that's his first. Again, it's
Yeah,
one of those things that
he
are
pulls
picked up with
someone's
someone.
head off, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Don't worry, I'll
Yes.
save you. Just pops someone's head off.
Yeah. Absolutely. And there's some of the nicest and some of the most interesting relationships the Primarchs have. Gilliman and his mother, his father, obviously he's dead, but originally, they have these the ones that have these human relationships tend to be the ones that are slightly more balanced, I think, or at least more prone to stay loyal to the Emperor and actually have, whereas the ones that have less of that, Lorgar, his upbringing, obviously I tackle that in another book, but so the fact that he was, but there's also like that whole the whole thing of like being raised in secret, and he's a bit of a chosen one, but he doesn't like the idea of being a chosen one, and actually people should be in charge of their own destiny and things like that. So he's again got this kind of confliction in his personality of like, well, he is amazing and this incredible being who should be in charge just on his intellect and his physical abilities and everything else, but he's quite uncomfortable with that idea a lot of the time.
Yeah, I thought it was a great introduction, and even seeing himself compared, because so baby Primarchs are one of my favorite things to read about. Pacing forwards, the boy saw the look of surprise, terror, and hope in the eyes of the workers. The little girl smiled at him, even as tears streaked the grime of her face. He wanted to make her happy, to give her something as a sign that everything would be all right. So he's already a good guy. What's your name? She asked. Mine is Nasturi Frenia. He grabbed the helmeted head of the guard, twisted and gave a pull, ripping it free. He offered it up to the girl, who laughed even as the adult started to cry out in panic. He saw himself reflected in the visor and realized the reason for the alarm he had caused. He was nude and clothed in the body of a child no older than Frenia. Blood was splattered across his snow-white skin, his crimson-splashed face framed with a shock of coal-black hair. His eyes were utterly black, darker than night. He searched for an answer to the girl's question as blood dribbled down his naked arms. Only one reply seemed appropriate, drawn up from the depths of embryonic memory. 19, he said. I'm 19. And I just thought him seeing himself reflected in the visor, and we see his humanity in that moment, but at the same time covered with blood. That was such a microcosm of that was really brilliant. And he gets to see the stuff that we're all yearning to see. He gets to go into the labyrinth and see his father's creation of this incredibly tricky maze to get through. And then he sees the gene labs. He gets to put his fingers on it. And more than that, I think I was looking back through the other heresy books, and the Emperor is the most straight talking with Corax out of all of them. With everybody else, it's like there are things beyond the veil that you cannot know about, my son. With Corax, it's very much there's this thing called the warp. There are demons, and the communication. If you could have a debate and say if the Emperor had been as communicative with Magnus, things might have been different. But
yeah, I suppose the argument is that again, his judgment of Magnus potentially being like, but the more I tell him, the more he's going to want to know.
Yes.
He's just never going to be satisfied. He's on that quest for knowledge.
Yeah.
I need to just go, no, you don't walk through this door. With Corax is not on that quest. Corax will just take that information. Corax is very pragmatic in many,
yeah.
But the whole thing is it's mixing up all those ideas, because of course, that solidity of what Corax is, but actually bringing him face to face for what he is.
Yes.
You are just but whatever else you might be, you were a thing that was created in this lab. And then later on, his doubts come in. It's like, well, what was used? Why are we? Sanguinius has got wings, and I can turn invisible, and it's like, that's not right. Yeah. And I've seen bad stuff happening. And again, it's like, and having been in that lab and thinking, that's not a scientific thing that he did to us. There's something else, and that idea, like the encapsulation of whatever devil's bargain it was that the Emperor struck to create the Primarchs, if he did do something, whether it's a real thing or a metaphorical using, like warp-based technologies or whatever it was that went into the makeup of the Primarchs to make them what they are. Was it just was it always a poison chalice that he was handing them, or or was it this big cosmic? It really was he outplayed the gods, and it can work either way. That's what's great about 40k is it works on every level, and Corax is very much at the center of that. Of like, did actually the fire that Prometheus brought down, was it tainted?
Oh,
And therefore, in his own heart, he's like, am I wrong? But am I broken?
yeah.
And that's what propels him for the rest of the heresy. Really, is that
Wow.
again his belief, because it doesn't necessarily have to be true or not. His doubt creates that journey, and everything he sees then fits into that, and his confirmation bias kicks in, and everything confirms that, like, particularly because he doesn't understand that there's an outside interference that condemns his sons, or his space marines, to this grisly fate. He thinks it's something intrinsic in him. He thinks he's broken, and therefore they're going to be broken. And when he can't fix it, it's over. It's like, well, all we can do now, but never loses his loyalty. That thing is, we're going to go down fighting. We're not going to. That's where the emo thing stops. It's like, well, no, I'm not going gently into that good night. I'm going to. In fact, sorry, excuse me. Again, he makes this terrible vow of like, I will destroy chaos, including myself and all my brothers. That's what that's what I think is included. That's kind of the trajectory he ends up on. So
Yeah. Well, yeah, I feel very grateful we got all these insights. It felt as close as we've been allowed to get to a Primarch, and hearing from the Primarch point of view is always so exciting. That was really, really valuable. I mean, we also have, some less favourites in there. So we've got the various Alfariuses trying to stitch everything up. And then right at the end, Amegan, who just is, he's Loki. He doesn't care. And, even with Horus, he's playing Horus at the end, and he has an opportunity to strike down Corax and chooses not to for mischief making. So I have a question, which is, obviously I've just learned from the Alpha Legion from Legion. That's my introduction to them. But the way that the Alpha Legion behave in this, to me, I was like, how do you write them? You don't know what side they're going to fall down on. Some of it seems random craziness. Some of it seems whim. They're saying yes to one group, no to another. Then they're letting out poor little space globe alien.
Yes, I enjoyed that. It's like punting him out. Bye.
Your spaceship will be here soon. Where? I don't see it. Maybe in 200 years. So how do you write the Alpha Legion? Do you just write them as crazy random, or do you know what the Alpha Legion are plotting?
Well, so I mean, that was a very specific. You're talking about like being in that room and like other influences and sort of like storylines and stuff. And the Alpha Legion were very definitely one of those. Dan had started spinning certain plates with them, and there are things like the Cabal and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And they were going in a certain direction. They've been, that's one of those trying to pick up on those conversations, but I hadn't necessarily picked a particular trajectory. And that was the thing, was to essentially the job in Deliverance Lost was to keep the plates spinning, wasn't to break any of them or take them off. So we didn't, it wasn't the job of Deliverance Lost to say like, oh well, actually they fell to chaos, or they didn't.
Yeah.
And that's always been. Again, elsewhere, tackling Dark Ages and all that kind of stuff. The whole thing is for those is not to, it's to kind of tread those lines as carefully as possible, so that until the last possible moment, at least, you can say, maybe they're going to go this way, maybe they're going to go this way, or in fact, actually, they've gone all the ways, which is kind of the that's kind of as it is with the Omegon Alfarius, and like the duality of the Legion and all this kind of stuff about, well, actually there's this kind of tendency to think that so they were kind of on this mission supposedly maybe for these aliens, sort of maybe to let to help the chaos side win, but to do it had to be like burn itself out quickly, and and all this kind of other stuff. But actually the Alpha Legion by this point are still kind of got their own agenda. So, and
Yeah.
again, Omegon is definitely like, well, I don't want some, like, say, some little globe alien dude telling me what to do. Because again, it's like, actually, that doesn't feel right. So he and, you know, they're already sort of like divided opinions.
Mm.
And for me, it's the same with things like the Night Lords and stuff, where you go, oh, you know, they don't really follow any particular Chaos God and things like that. You go, well, no, but they fall to the same temptations of chaos, and they end up fracturing, and the heads of the Hydra going in so many ways that they literally, you know, left head doesn't know what right head's doing, doesn't know what third right head's doing, and stuff. And that's the point, and end up, you know, just being this kind of fragmented bunch of cells almost, you know. And obviously they're not there yet, but again, this is the start of that, of like, actually they're so independent of thought that as soon as some of them break off from another bit, they start going off on their own thing. And then, oh, actually, you know, it's like they have so much initiative, it's coming out of their ears. But the problem is they have, you know, they forget, or that obsessiveness. It's, again, without being overt about it, because it's not as simple as that, but like kind of that Zinchian politics of like feeding in on itself, and it just the change itself is important. It's not an end. It's just, so for them, you know, again, over the course of the heresy, and then their actual corruption is the plots within plots.
Yeah.
Service themselves. They end up, there isn't an end that they're actually achieving in here. It's just to have another plot. You know, there's always just it's an Inception style aha, but there's another reveal within. There's another, and they can't break themselves out of it. Now, at the time of Deliverance Lost, they're a long way from that point, but they're starting. You know, they've already been operating in such a way where they're supposed to just go off and they've been told what to do, but they're very much supposed to just respond to circumstances and do their own thing. And you know, there's no real central command. So, you know, Omegon's there to do, you know, keep an eye maybe on the people there. But again, there's another whole thing with the rebellion that's already going on. That's kind of you know, there's already the cult of the dragon and things that have infiltrated the Mechanicus on Kievar and stuff. So it's which again, it just hints at the idea that the heresy wasn't something that happened overnight either, and that some of this stuff is just very long. You know, and we're just seeing the erupting, basically. We're seeing the tip of the iceberg of this corruption that's been going on for decades, if not centuries.
Yeah. I mean, I think it lent to the book because there was just no way to put your finger on what they're up to. So, you know, sometimes you read a book and you're like, they need to get from A to B and steal this and kick that person's butt. But this, I was like, what are you doing? Like, why are you making these choices? And hang on a minute, he's doing this, but the other one, it was really engaging, and it kept me kind of completely clueless until the end. So yeah.
Well, I think that was one of the, again, you know, like the faces thing was definitely Dan's got to think about, you know, him and the editor at the time, Laurie was always like, why are you cutting off people's faces? And it was like, you know, literally he had this idea of like people stealing faces, very visual kind of idea of like, but then, you know, like their librarians and their organs and stuff allowed them to assimilate some of their memories.
Yeah.
Which, you know, kind of makes sense. Suddenly you go, oh, actually, yeah, what would their librarian powers be? They're not just throwing fireballs around, but they're all about subterfuge and misdirection and absorbing personality and stuff, which is cool. But the idea that, again, even the three infiltrators don't know who each other are. So it's that triple redundant system that they all know what they're there to do, and they're all going to try and do it, but they actually end up even working against each other slightly.
Yeah.
And again, that's that very Alpha Legion thing of like, suddenly they're in each other's way, or they're not quite sure, because, you know, and I can't remember the timing of it, but there's probably a little bit of I don't know if you saw the remakes of Battlestar Galactica, but there's a little bit of you know, like, again, the Cylons not necessarily knowing who they are, and so the idea of them losing their sense of personality because they've got these implanted memories and personalities in some ways.
That's what I was hoping was going to happen.
So identity, again, power and identity, there are two things I always wound up writing about. So it's like, who are they and what do they want? So, but for the Alpha Legion, you know, what they want was fairly clear, but they're just there to mess with Corax, but they don't know quite why or how. And then,
I think the way you've written Alpha Legion has helped me understand a lot of what I'm going to be experiencing later. I also want to give mad props for, it's 10 to 8. I don't want to keep you super long. Could I keep you maybe a little bit after 8?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Excuse me. I'm just gonna...
Okay. Sorry, I know. Thank you.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, we're good.
Thank you. So mad props to, because obviously I knew that something bad was going to happen with the genes, and then we have these body horror elements of these poor young, raptors suddenly becoming, deformed. And there's a great scene where someone's talking and he said he just had his vestigial tail removed, really great moments. But I guess that's that whole kind of mutation and what was happening, the changes the raptors were going through, that really helped me visualize, this is what Ravenguard is, this is what they look like. So, I mean, why are all Black Library authors so good at body horror, Gav?
I don't know. I suppose it's like just one of those things, isn't it? Of like, to be fair, it's absorbing a lot of that art at a very impressionable age.
Yes.
Too much John Blanche when I
John
was 11,
Blanche. It all comes back to John bloody Blanche
and Ian Miller and
Ian.
all that kind of weirdness and stuff like that. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's probably, and it is one of the big appeals, that grotesqueness of like the visuals that you get in 40k. And obviously there's actually a lot less of it in a lot of the general heresy stuff, because stuff's a lot straight. It doesn't have a lot of that the gothic like overtones that then accrue across the 10,000 years of the Imperium. So the Space Marines are, not necessarily cleaner, but they're like, they're not. Again, now one of those transitions we see over the course of the heresy from a legionnaire into the kind of like the slightly crazy, like purity sealed Space Marines and stuff. So for the Raptors as they are at the time, again, it's the same as it's almost the same as Corax, really, of like putting them up there. They're the best of the best, the fastest, the strongest. They are the chosen generation. And Navar Hef himself as well. Like, he's so lucky, he just gets in on the lottery almost on a fluke.
Yeah.
As I think he doesn't. He's the last one in through the door kind of thing, which was just it's like, so he's so pleased to have been selected. And yeah, of course, at the time, I'm already knowing, you poor sod.
I know.
You've been you've already been singled out for this.
You're so good at dashing the hopes, Gav. Masterfully orchestrated. But,
yeah.
Is Corax your favourite Primarch?
I think it probably is. I think I really, there's, yeah. I mean, I think because the way I got to write with him and the story I got to tell, and the sort of like the way the Legion was built around him, and in some ways because there was less big beats of the heresy that I had to worry about.
Yeah.
There's some stuff later on where they turn up at certain places and things, but again, that gave me a lot of space to be able to create a plot that then gave me the character development I needed. They didn't have to just turn up at this place and hit these people, because that was already an extant thing. So there are challenges that faced them and things like the labyrinth, and I had quite a lot of freedom to take Corax actions as I needed them to, because most of the stuff was about the heresy up to Stand 5, and there was also some really nice stuff from the Forge World books, actually, and about tying in the Ravenguard to the compliance of Istvan and the history. And so there was a nice layer of history already, which I didn't necessarily have to go into lots, but again, there was just a little, there was stuff there I could just touch on and draw from, and the idea of what it meant for the Legion to suffer the way it had done, but not quite in the same way that we kind of explore with the Shattered Legions. It's like they kind of get out, they escape, but at what cost, kind of thing. Yeah. So Corax being like the embodiment of that, and and it's a 40k story. It's like this Horus Heresy, that idea of damnation, of chaos, and the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and all those things that I love about 40k, was able to like put into Corax himself.
Well, I'm very grateful. I was really excited to read your first book, because I have lots of friends who just absolutely adore you and your writing, and I was so not disappointed. I think Corax might be my favourite Primarch as a result, although I'm sure I'll stand to regret that as the books go on. But I do have a load of questions from people who were like,
yep.
Won't take up too much of your time. Well, we've answered this already. Historiator Jamaldus said, did you talk to Dan Abnett to plan the development of the Alpha Legion and their turning against the Cabal and playing both sides? And it sounds like yes, very much. What has been your favourite Legion to write, and why?
So I think probably the Dark Angels just in slightly because they're the same. The stuff I get to do with Corax, I've done with the whole Legion. So I'm not. I've done some fun stuff with the Lion, but actually, I think there's the Ravenguard are much more a reflection of Corax and his personality, whereas the Dark Angels, particularly with the split with Luther and all and
Yeah.
stuff, basically that we see later on, makes I've had a lot of fun with them as well, I guess. So, and also in some ways, because I've been writing stories in current 40k about Dark Angels, is like having stuff
Yeah.
backwards and forwards and things. So they're probably the most fun. But the opportunity, it's always fun to, even since like the days when I worked in the studio, it's like one of the things that's great is being confronted with a challenge of like, you need to write about this faction or these character stuff and finding what it is in there that excites you, what you think is cool. And so, from scratch, sometimes you hadn't really necessarily thought about them before you go, okay, well, this is what's really cool about them. I'm going to explore these themes and these characters. So, whether it's world eaters or word bearers or whatever, and particularly with some of the stuff that got built by the other writers during the Heresy, you're like, oh, actually, that's really cool. The one, funnily enough, the one I didn't get to write lots about and I really enjoy is the story of Sanguinius and the Blood Angels. I mean, they're really well done by everybody else, but I've always had personally a soft before I'd done the Heresy. If I'd had a choice, I would have loved to have written, Sanguinius, but because he's one of those he's the version of Corax that doesn't fall. He's the noble warrior who doesn't, at the end, doesn't flinch, doesn't, and I love that story. So.
Oh, thank you. Good answer. I'm excited for reading your further books and more Dark Angel stuff. That's funny because the next question is from Satin Throne. Given he's written some grand books for the Ravenguard and Dark Angels, did Gav ever think about what he might do for one of the other black armored loyalist legions, the Iron Hands?
Yeah, I suppose that. Interestingly, that was that sort of like the there's something that could have been, they were very short on background really in terms of what happens to them, and obviously that kind of curtails their involvement. And I think the stuff that happens with Shattered Legion stuff was very cool. It was nice to do a little bit of that. I had one short story where there's some Iron Hands and some salamanders fighting along. That's part of the Shattered Legions anthology. But yeah, I mean, you can say the same about everything. It's like, oh, it would have been great. What would we have done? They weren't one that's. I have to say that I suppose that in some ways, because there'd been so little about them, they would have been a great challenge. But I'm not necessarily sure I would have come up with what they did come up with, which was what they came up with was better than I would have done. I think combination of Dan and Graham and Nick and all the other and various other people and the big the kind of like the way they dealt with it. I think particularly because I'd already done my Broken Legion story, or I was doing my Broken Legion story with the Ravenguard, it would have been hard not to repeat the beats. So the fact that the Shattered Legions get treated very differently, and that's one of the interesting things because the Ravenguard get the absolute bejesus kicked out of them, but their Primarch survives, and that's the difference.
Yes.
And again, that's one of the key. So a very different vibe to the Iron Hands, really.
Yeah, I mean, you want to go one more tragic, go Iron Hands. So, and then Well Inspector. There's been a lot of discussion about this name. How did you come up with the name Vincent Six? Is it Nicky Six from Motley Crue, or is it Vincent Price? Or
Oh, I don't know. I can't remember. I don't.
That name has really captured people's imagination.
Right? Yeah. I don't know. Sometimes it's just the sound of the words. I think it just sounds good. So
I think
there wasn't a specific, as far as I remember, it wasn't a particular reference. Put it that
You've
way.
heard it here first, people.
Yeah.
You've mythified it, but I think again that kind of name gave it that feeling of that very kind of like heavy metal video, that kind of like the epic kind of movie music video feel, definitely. But then we've got Nat West. Nat's so funny. I always say, does anyone have a question? He writes an essay, So he's written a cheeky one. This book came out way before the movie Guardians of the Galaxy, but the prison break in that movie, when I first watched it, made me think of the prisoners liberating Lysaeus, which is nice. And then he said, so here's a question from NatWest. Out of all the sons, is Corax the most favoured of all by the Emperor, or was it the Emperor's desperate roll of the dice as the game was coming to an end? I think you've kind of spoken on this already, but
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I think Corax perhaps needed to feel that he was the most favoured, or that there's. It came about because there was again in the existing background. There's a very specific mention of like when after basically he drops the nukes on Kievar and the tech guild surrender and stuff, and he gets a visitation from the Emperor, and the Emperor spends a day talking to him. Which doesn't really happen with a lot of the time. Like the Emperor will come up and he'll get a Primarch and he'll take them away, and they go on crusades together and bond,
yeah.
or he's really nasty to them, like Angron, and he whips them away from their loved ones or whatever. Yeah, and does all kinds of stuff. So there's a big mix of it, but he just sits down and has a talk. He just spends a day, and essentially, do they debate? Does he convince him? It's like. And again, that's where that idea of like does he realize that Corax wouldn't bow to a god, but will bow to a man of reason? And I've always liked with the Emperor reminding myself and through the stories, but the sort of like readers, that the Emperor was, despite being like the big golden figure of psychic, demigod thing, was a man of science. That was the whole point. Is he the original backgrounds and stuff. He was a scientist who had these backgrounds, but he was always about creating the Primarch things through science. So again, rational, and is that the way he managed? And so he continues to appear that way, and that's how he has to be that. He can't be bigger than life for Corax, because Corax wouldn't accept that. But actually, just like the other father figure, he's surrounded by father and mother figures who raise him and stuff, but actually the Emperor being just one of those, but a little bit more. So
works beautifully. Well, we've managed to answer all the questions from the people who were very got them in on time. And I realised, because I just love this book so much, I hammered straight in. And I normally say to an author when I meet them, when you were little, Gav, baby Primarch, baby Gav, how did you find your way into the hobby? Like, what's your proximity to Nottingham? Is it where you grew up in Nottingham, you just have to be part of it? How did
no, I mean, I moved up here for work, for Games Workshop. So specifically to sort of like Warhammer things, my introduction was through my older cousin. So I've got a cousin who was into like miniatures and games and things like that. So so through sort of like that and role playing games and stuff like that, when I was sort of like the impressionable age of like 9 or 10, and like I say, he was probably 14 or 15, and that I fairly soon focused on Warhammer and 40k in particular, and so when Rogue Trader came out, I was 13. So that was, and I remember me and a friend, and we had, and my first game of 40k, we had a Space Marine captain each and a hill, and we ran around the hill using the indirect fire rules to throw grenades at each other because we're too scared to go up and try and, in case we got shot.
I love that.
So. And so between that and reading 2000 AD was the two main influences, I suppose, when I was, that sort of like that 80s, like kind of counterculture, sort of vibe that was going on. Was basically my teenage years, while I was, and the art was the main thing. Like I say, I mean, I wanted to be an illustrator originally, before a writer. So and then, so I always enjoyed drawing and just doing being massively inspired by like the Realm of Chaos books in particular. Again, and a lot of that, like I say, that very strange, crazy Warhammer vibe that hooks you in. So and at the same time, into toy soldiers, into writing, making up games and stuff like that. So it was just
inevitable.
Pretty much, I suppose.
Thank God.
I was just fortunate. Well, absolutely, and it's one of those things. You looking back, I didn't necessarily realise quite at the time, and they weren't massive geeks, but I realised just like how slightly nerdy my parents were. You know, they were thinking about the books that were on the shelves. So I remember very much. Again, I'd seen a copy already before with my cousin, but I remember my dad coming home from work one day, and there was a copy of Warlock of Fire Top Burn, the very first fighting fantasy book on the shelves. And me and my brother were so excited, but my dad wouldn't let us play it. It's like it's his book, and I think back at the time it was like didn't really think about it too much. But again, that's a fairly niche thing to do back then. And like there was Stephen King and H.G. Wells, and so
Yeah.
like mixed. So between them, you know, my mum read some fantasy and horror, and my dad had Stephen Donaldson and stuff like that. So yeah, it was probably a slightly nerdier upbringing, but not directly. It was never.
Nature and nurture, you see, Gav?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just all there, seeded into it, really.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, my father passed away in 2012, and my legacy is we had Star Trek on all the time. He'd bring back these books with amazing covers of like planets, and I'd steal them and read them, and they'd say, "We're not old enough to read those." And that kind of having one nerdy parent that you see get so much quiet joy, or I think it allowed me to kind of step into this universe. And now when I have times where I'm feeling a bit, to have a community that also is into that nerdy makes me feel very safe. So I love that you had that with your parents too. They raised you right.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so when I was growing up at Easter, so we didn't get like too many chocolate eggs. Our grandparents used to buy us presents instead, me and my brother. So one set grandparents would buy us a little Lego set. And then over a couple of years, the other set of grandparents, the grandparents of the same cousin, so one particular year they bought us a couple of the very early Games Workshop games, so before Warhammer, but when they were used to board games, one called Valley of the Four Winds, one called Warlock. But the next year they bought us a couple of games which were basically called Dungeons and Dragons, which was a basic set, an expert set. And my dad agreed to run a couple of adventures for him. We probably only had like 2 sessions in total, I think, unfortunately. And my elf died in the very first session. And I remember burying it outside the cave. So, but again, just thinking of like my dad's willingness just to like, oh, okay, yeah, we'll play this game and see how it works. Try it out. So that between that and I said my cousin, who was very much into miniatures and very artistic and
What's your cousin's name?
Sean.
Mad.
Sean,
Thank you,
Sean. Absolutely, yeah. Definitely wouldn't be here today without Sean.
Yay! So, okay, we must remember Sean. Yeah. Thank you, Gav. I'm so pleased we got to talk about family stuff. That's lovely, and thank you so much for all your time today.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for being here today. I'm so looking forward to coming to your next book in the Heresy and inviting you back. But yay. Thank you
you say that now.
Oh no, what is it? Oh God.
It doesn't matter.
Oh no. Well, I got through that. If I can get through the bloody word bearers putting a stake up a custodian, I might.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
If I can get through bloody Graham McNeil in Fulgrim's barrel.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's not. Yeah, it's not like that. It's more. It'll be the heartstrings rather than the ick factor.
Oh no, even worse.
If you're, yeah. So
well, you know what?
It doesn't get much better for Corax. Put it that way.
I think having met you, I trust you, and I'll let you take me there because I think it's worth it for the heart and soul that you put in. But thank you so much, and yeah, I'll see you next time. Thank you, Gav.
Thank you very much. Thanks for reading.
Bye.
In the dark.